with David Kelly, one of our keynote speakers at the Learning Ideas Conference 2021. David is the Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the Learning Guild. He's based here in New York, and it's a pleasure to have him here speaking with me today. So great to see you, David.
Great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, this is really a chance for our audience to get to know you, get to know a little bit more about your background and what brought you into this field. So, if you can tell us just a little bit about, where you first became interested in online learning and kind of what drove you to, get into this field and to where you are now.
Sure. I think like many people in our field, I fell into L&D accidentally. I started my career in banking and finance, and like a lot of people in L&D, I did my job and I did it well, and people noticed that I did it well and were kind of like, you do that really well, you should go show other people how to do that. And suddenly I found myself in a training role of just kind of showing other people how to do what I do, and very quickly discovered that I fell in love with it, that I just really enjoyed the training aspect, the building of it, the working with people, the mentoring and the coaching. And really fell in love with it, and in a very short period of time, kind of stopped seeing myself as a finance banking person and started seeing myself as an L&D person. Started becoming a student of the field and really just immersed myself in it and discovered that was where my passion truly lied. Was in banking for too long, 11 plus years. I see 15 plus years across a couple of different banks. But after the first couple of years, it was always in an L&D training director type of role, and just kind of moved my career through there. After about 15 years of finance, I decided I wanted to do some more meaningful work, try to use my skills in a more meaningful way. So I went to a nonprofit and spent a shorter than anticipated amount of time there, as much as I loved it. And then about 8 years ago was when the Learning Guild called and had an interesting opportunity for me. That was a shift. I'm no longer doing as much as, at least within my work at the Guild. I do some consulting on the side, but I'm no longer an internal practitioner. I now am the executive director for the Learning Guild, which is a community of practice for people who use technology to build education and training programs. We host conferences and we do with all sorts of different media magazines, things of that sort. So my job, in addition to just running the operations of that organization, is essentially to be what I like to do anyway, which is just be a student of the field, to just know where the field is going, track where it's going, put that into context with people, build resources that help people do their jobs better. So I just spend my day being immersed in this field, this intersection of learning and technology, and building resources that can help people navigate that space better.
Oh, that's great. I'm also curious then about your interest in technology, since you kind of came from a little more, from the personal touch side, right, with coaching and mentoring. How do you see technology fitting into sort of the humanizing side, and how did you first get interested in it?
Well, admittedly, I would feel like it needs to be full disclosure that I am a gearhead. Like I am the shiny object of it's new, it's interesting, and I want to play with it. And I think a lot of us fall into that space, and I'm one of those people who falls into that space that needs to, that as much as I want to play with it, I want to go do these things, need to step back and be like, all right, but why? Like, how is this going to be useful? How is this going to be practical? But I do tend to lean towards the techie space, and in terms of a strategic end of it, I always do look at it through the lens of, how's this going to make us better? How's this going to make us more efficient? How is this going to solve a problem that we're not able to solve today? And I do think we are rapidly approaching, the world is evolving in a way that technology is playing more and more in that space. I think a lot of, you hear the conversations around AI and technology in general, around it's taking people's jobs and things of that sort. And I know that can be a hot button topic for a lot of people. I tend to look at it through the lens of, it's not technology or humans, it's technology with humans, and it's an augmented experience. And if there's something that that technology can do for us as humans, that it can do better, enabling and freeing up the time for humans to spend more of our efforts on the human value and the things that are uniquely human benefit, then we should be exploring that. And that tends to be the lens through which I look at technology in the context of the work that we do in L&D.
Yeah, no, and I guess very much in agreement with you on that, and see it the same way that the technology, when used in the right ways, has the potential to humanize things further. We can create personalized learning experiences for people. We can free people up to do the things that people can do, because there is sort of a strange tendency to almost turn people into machines, right? So you'll see technology used for more scores and tracking, and that's all that there is, and not really setting people up to be able to think creatively. And so in terms of how you might advise companies to think about technology and learning, are there sort of some key points you might want to share with us about how you think companies would be best served in sort of their mindset when they're looking at how to employ technology? I think it's very easy for companies to say, hey, this is something out there, let's put it in, it'll help us, but it might not really be the right thing culturally or for the employee base. So in sort of light of the lens that you see technology as humanizing, where do you see companies, kind of a long question, where do you see companies having an opportunity to try out a new mindset in the way that they use technology and learning?
Sure. So I get questions like this a lot, and I think people are often surprised by some of the answers that I give, because they're expecting an in the weeds, very tactical, surprising answer, and a lot of times my first answer is much more simplistic, and I think I touched on it a second ago. What problem is it solving for you? Like, people seem to skip over that basic question of what is the technology going to solve for us? What is it going to enable us to do we can't do today? What is it going to enable us to do better? Otherwise, why would you spend the money? If you can't answer that in a very tactical and specific way, why would you spend the money? And I think we often overlook that. I do think that there are another thing that I always recommend people do is we tend to focus, even though it's a question about technology, the answer does not come from technology. If you're looking at the technology, if you're making your decisions based on what the technology does and what the features and the benefits of the technology are, you're going down a path of risk, because the technology normally doesn't fail because of the technology. Technology normally fails because of the culture. It normally fails because of the lack of a plan. I mean, I mentioned I work in banking, and I'm pretty sure that if I went to the first bank that I worked at, I haven't been there in over 20 years, but if I went to a specific closet that I can remember and I opened the door, there would still be a stack of iPads in there that we bought because we needed to digitize everything. And it was bought because we digitize everything. We're going to save all the paper costs. We're going to do all these different things. And nobody thought through the workflows of making that happen, of how people are using these things and everything. And we bought them, and everyone was like, this is cool, really tech. All right, we're going to, and we put them in the closet because it didn't fit the culture, it didn't fit the workflows, it didn't do anything. It was technology that was bought with a problem that nobody was having, and to solve a problem that nobody was having. And that, I think, is the lens through which we need to look at it. The technology, understanding the features and benefits is important, but if you want to really get the value of it, it's not the features and benefits that matter. It's the application of those features and benefits to the context of your organization.
Yeah, and personally, I've always sort of found myself almost bothered and offended by the use of the word features in a lot of ways, because software tends to focus so much on features and not goals, right? And so you get, well, it has these things. Okay, well, that's really nice. What are we going to do with it? How is it going to help us? And the goals are really the key, and the features are, almost become overwhelming. And it's really nice to say it can do all these things, but again, what are the goals? And as you mentioned, how does it fit into the workflow? And all that. So let me ask a different question. When you look at the technologies that we have sort of out there now and coming into the mainstream, what are you most excited about from the standpoint of, where you really can see the beginnings of an impact, you start to see an impact, and you see sort of, really good fits in workplace cultures and in workplace environments, and maybe some potential for acceptance as well to really make inroads. So what are some technologies that really kind of have you excited right now through the lens that you are viewing this?
Sure. So there's a couple. I mean, there's a number of them that I can mention, and in the keynote I'm going to do at the conference, I'll go through all of them. But they all matter, and they're all excite me for different contexts. So I'll touch on a couple. One is the data conversation, the data and analytics conversation, which I look at through the lens not of L&D per se, but in the business of work and how work is getting done. and the increasing nature through which organizations are making business decisions based on data. They're more informed decisions. And I think that whether I'm an L&D professional that is literally doing that in my own work make better use of the data that we have available so that we can make data informed decisions, or whether my organization is doing that just as part of their daily work, it's going to impact the work that I do as an L&D professional. And I need to be aware of that and be a part of that conversation. So that excites me, because I think we've struggled with that as long as I've been in this field, and longer than that. The idea of what data means to L&D, how we use it, how we leverage it, it's always been a fairly superficial, challenging thing for us to be able to do more effectively. And I think that technology and the way that our organizations are using data and analytics is going to change that. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for us. The other one that I'll mention in the context of this discussion is there's always a flip side. For me, it's two discussions, but they always seem to be discussed in the same context, is the AR/VR discussion. I always describe them as two separate things, because they're two different things, but they're often coupled together. But one of the reasons I look at them differently is because the value proposition is very different in my mind. Where VR excites me is a very narrow but powerful niche. I don't think VR is going to be replacing huge amounts of what we do today. I think it's going to be occupying a space that we've never been able to fill. The ability for people to practice and develop real world skills in a safe environment where the risk of failure is too great, where it could be literally life and death, it could be millions of dollars if somebody fails to do a task. The ability to simulate that experience in a safe environment is very powerful, and something we've never been able to do as effectively as we can in VR. And I think that's going to occupy a small but very powerful space in the L&D world. The AR piece, I think, is a little bit of the flip side of that. I think it's going to be a very broad use case. I think it's going to redefine long-term what it means to support the workforce. You know, one of the things that I find interesting about the early portions of the AR discussions is that it's not, in a lot of cases, AR isn't entering the field of supporting workers in their work, but it's not going through L&D departments. It's going through the manufacturing floors. It's going through the people in the field, where they're getting these devices that enable them to just work differently, to work more efficiently, to get supported. And it's not necessarily a tool that's being used by the training department, although they will need to support it. It's just redefining what it means to work in an increasingly digital connected world and being supported appropriately. And whether we, again, kind of like data conversation, whether we're as L&D professionals driving that conversation, or whether it's something that is happening in the workforce that we support and we need to be aware of how to better support that, it's going to have a very meaningful impact on our work in the near future. I think AR is a little further out, because I don't think it's really going to be transformative until we get away from AR as a handset-driven experience and get more towards a headset-driven experience. And we're just not there yet culturally and normalcy-wise.
Yeah, no, I think I tend to agree with you on these. And then, sort of related to that, how do you see the role of L&D changing and evolving, both in light of technological advances and in light of everything that people have done then over the past year or so, due to the pandemic, as they had to make some rapid changes to move at least classroom in-person experiences to Zoom experiences, and then think about what else they can do with technology. So as you look at that, you mentioned how some things don't even necessarily come through L&D, AR necessarily doesn't come through L&D. How do you see the role of L&D changing in light of the changes to technology and the upcoming changes as well?
Sure. So the biggest change that I think is going to be coming to L&D is that I'll phrase this a little oddly, but there's a lot of people that are suddenly playing in our house. That they're not necessarily thinking of themselves as training people. They're not thinking of it as I'm doing L&D work. They're integrating the ability to support people in their work while they're working. They're just finding that the technology is increasingly enable us to either give people the support that they need to solve the problem that they're having while they're working, or they're just giving people the resources necessary for them to solve the problem themselves. I mean, you think about even something as very simple as you're having a conversation with someone, and that you're asked a question and neither one of you know the answer. somebody pulls out their phone and Googles it to get the answer. And that's not, no one's pulling out their phone and saying, I'm a self-directed learner, I'm going to get this answer on my own. They're just using technology to solve the problem of not knowing in the moment. And I think we're seeing more of that there's more of this self-service infrastructure built digitally. And that's gonna transform what it means to learn as an individual, which then transforms what it means for us to support those people as L&D professionals. On the flip side of that, the pandemic piece, I think that there's a huge opportunity in what we've gone through within the pandemic, in the sense of a lot of organizations, not all, but I think a lot of organizations were forced to challenge assumptions about how they operate and what L&D does. You know, we don't do that. We can't have people be remote. Everybody needs to be in the office. We could never do onboarding via virtual stuff. We've got to bring everybody into the same space. And suddenly the pandemic happened and they were like, well, we're going to have to do it. And we're going to have to we have no choice. And they discovered that it worked. They discovered that it wasn't, they might have gone into it saying, we're going to do the best we can. It's not going to be ideal. It's not going to work, but we've still got to bring people in. And then they discovered over the last year, this actually works. And in some cases, it might even be better and more efficient than what we were doing before. So we were forced as organizations and L&D professionals to go pretty far outside of our comfort zone. And ideally, when this is starting to subside and we get back to normal, our comfort zone doesn't contract back to where it was. It's now an expanded comfort zone. And what we believe we can do as L&D professionals, what our organizations believe we can contribute, has now grown. And I think that that is a huge silver lining opportunity for what we've gone through in the last 18 months.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to ask one follow-up, getting back to your comment about self-directed learning, and it's absolutely true and a wonderful thing. You can find things, on your own quickly, easily, in a different world than ever before. Within an organization, how do we balance that, and what are your views on how that would balance against expertise? There is, what you find online depends on where you're looking, may or may not be accurate. There is a level of expertise. There's a level of expertise that's of tremendous value, not just quick facts and information, but at a sort of broader level about how to perform a job within a certain culture. So how do we kind of best balance this new level of sort of self-reliance that people have with the expertise that an organization already has and the cultural knowledge and cultural skills that have been built up organizationally over the years?
So there's a couple of different answers to that. The biggest one that is kind of screaming in the back of my head, which is, it sounds like a cop-out, but it depends. And the reason that I say it depends is the culture piece of that defines a lot of what you may or may not be able to do. For instance, like there's a part of me that says, ideally, in an idealistic world, that you would have more of a curation type mindset to the way that your organization does things, where you encourage people to bubble these things up. You encourage them to find the answers to themselves, and if they find a really good answer, to share that answer with everybody else so that everybody benefits from it. And the L&D department becomes, the more visible all of this becomes, the L&D department becomes that curation team that vets what's being shared and amplifies the stuff that's really, really of value, and tries to and constrains and corrects the stuff that might be shared that is actually incorrect or not within context. And with the organizations that are doing that, it is a really powerful thing when you're able to get everybody engaged in that level. But not every organization is like that. Unfortunately, I'd say it's a small slice of the pie that can do that, because you've got to have an organization that is safe to fail. All you need is to have one person say, hey, I did this and it worked out really well, and get slapped down publicly for that because they made a mistake or they overstepped the line, and nobody's ever going to do that again. And so the culture, I think the self-directed learning and the curation aspects of it that extend from there can be really, really powerful. But your culture's got to be in. There's a whole maturity model of what your learning culture tends to be like. And in order to really do what I was describing initially, you're on the far end of an advanced learning culture. And most organizations probably need to baby step their way there. You can't do the end point. You've got to just kind of do some smaller things to build towards that.
And then, sort of following that a little bit, what are your thoughts on helping people prevent themselves from being overwhelmed? For example, you go into a restaurant, or at least when we used to go into restaurants, and they have a menu, and you might think, hey, I wish they had something that's not on the menu, but you have choices. And if you walked in and you could just choose anything, it's kind of overwhelming, potentially. You also don't necessarily know what's good here because there's nobody to advise you and nobody's experience to learn from. So when you're in a world that's so significantly self-directed and people are posting content and people have different ideas about different things, how do you, as an organization, how can you, address things so that people have some guidelines for how to best sift through things and not spend, their entire workday sort of being overwhelmed by all the content out there that may potentially be valuable to help and helpful to them, and so they don't sort of feel like they're in danger of missing out on anything that's important if they don't cover everything. And there's an exhaustivity issue that's always an issue in training that I think we always want to try to avoid. So those are kind of two related questions. Yeah, how do we keep people from being overwhelmed by the amount of content, and how can an organization help people direct themselves to sort of find the right things without feeling as if they, are missing something critical or going to be, penalized for missing something critical?
Sure. So I think that there's two aspects that I would touch on for that. The first one is the overwhelming piece. And I think that L&D plays a space in that, but I think it's also beyond L&D. Some of it is that L&D can influence, some of it's outside of L&D's influence. There is an aspect to it, to me, that is, we're all on a certain level overwhelmed with things. Business is moving. I mean, but forget a pandemic even for a second. Before you even added that to it, business moves as fast as it does, and everything is. If you had your priority list, there are all degrees of priority one. I mean, that's most of the pressure that people feel like they're working under. So having whether it's L&D or whether it's somebody higher up in the organization, being able to just kind of say, these are the things that are most important, to make it, to be very clear that these are the top priorities that our organization has, and everything else is kind of secondary to that, so that people can work accordingly to that. Not to say that everything is not important, but not everything is urgent and important. And to be able to prioritize what are the urgent things that we need to be focusing on today can reduce a little bit of that stress. The other piece of it, which I think is actually from a Venn, like if you visualize the two aspects of it from a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. The other thing that I think can help, both with the overwhelmingness and also with the self-directed, where it's all this there, is a bit of knowledge management aspect to everything that we do. And I actually love the metaphor that you're using of the restaurant. Because if I was walking down, if I'm walking down the street and I'm going down Restaurant Row in Manhattan, and my wife and I are deciding what we want to do, just walking down the street, I've got a lot of resources that are helping me make some decisions. Like just the structure of it, I look at a window, I'm like, oh, that's an Italian restaurant. I'm not in the mood for Italian tonight. And I keep walking. Oh, I'm a vegetarian. I'm not going to go to the steakhouse. And I keep walking. And the decisions are at the highest level of a knowledge management of how that's there are being. I'm getting the support of narrowing down my decision. I'm like, oh, there's a Chinese food restaurant here. I can go for Chinese. Let's go in there. So now when I get to that menu item, I've already selected my kind of preferences of there. I'm in the mood for Chinese food tonight. And all of that is just a big metaphor for, are people able to easily find what it is that they're looking for? And are we guiding them in the decision-making process? And not every organization does that well. But that is not only a huge part of enhancing how self-directed learning can work, because if I can't find what I need when I need it, that's a problem. And the more efficiently, the less. When I was in the banking, before we even had self-directed learning or anything in our vernacular, we always looked at it in the standpoint of how many clicks does somebody need to make to get to what they need. And if it's 37 clicks, they're never going to find what they need when they need it. So we got to find a way to narrow that down. And that's kind of the mentality of this knowledge management piece of, can people find what they need quickly and easily? And as compared to, somebody sent me an email attachment last week and I'm going to go search Outlook for it. That's a nightmare. So I think that's a big piece of it. There is a knowledge management piece that not only if we're effectively organizing information so that people can find it, that's going to have a natural effect on how effective self-directed learning is in your organization. And I think it also is going to reduce the stress, because nothing makes someone more stressful than I have a problem in my work as a customer in front of me that I need to deal with, and I can't find my answer.
Absolutely. And this to me seems like one more opportunity for technology, really well-designed technology to help, right? So, if you give me something that's actually going to help me find what I need when I need it based on my goals, that's really, really valuable. And that's incredibly hard to do. It's not, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Making sure that it has enough conceptual understanding of what anything is, what any piece of content or any learning experience or whatever is out there within the organization for you might be to help you. But this is an area where the more I can constrain, so it's not just 37 click, but it's, I ask a system, hey, I'm trying to find an answer to this, and it gives me 3 things that are like pretty much in the ballpark and gets me to the right people, gets me to the right content, then I'm really getting there. And that's, I mean, I think that's true in life as well as in work, and is not something that really is where it can be, I guess, to say it at this point. So do you see other, when you look at the world of technology that can help learning, do you see movements in that direction too, movements in, terms of helping with curation, knowledge management more and more, as well as sort of things that are more traditionally, quote, education and, and learning experiences?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting developments in recent years around learning platforms that I'll say the word and then I'll backtrack on the word, that are personalizing the learning experience more. And the reason I say I'll say the word and then I'll backtrack is because I think that there are a lot of technologies that are out there today that identify themselves as we deliver upon learning personalization. And personally, I don't think we're there yet. So learning personalization to me is not Netflix. We always hear about the Netflix of learning these days, and I think that there's a big difference between you're interested in this or you're doing this, therefore these things might apply to you, and that's powerful. Don't get me wrong. Like the fact that I go to Amazon and I make a purchase, and my first thought after I make the purchase is, "Ooh, I want that too." That personalization is amazing in a certain degree. But when we talk about learning personalization, for me, the real power behind learning personalization isn't about my interests. It's about my competency. It's about a platform that I'm using, recognizing the expertise that I have, whether I'm at an oversimplified level. I'm going to go use an application, and the application knows that David Kelly's logged in, and it's going to recognize whether I'm a novice, intermediate, or expert in using this platform, and giving me the appropriate layer of support based on my competency in doing that particular task. That to me is learning personalization. And while the individual components of that all exist to create that experience, it's not packaged yet. I mean, we talked earlier about the technology decisions that people make and the features and the benefits of technology. And I think one of the other things I often say to people is, yeah, you might see a bullet on the list that shows a feature that they offer, but you really need to dig into how. Like, yes, they offer learning personalization. How are they defining that? What is the experience there? And does that match your expectation of what you're looking for? Because the bullet and the feature could be very, very broad, but when you get under the hood of what it is it doing it in a way that's meaningful to your organization? So I think that's an important part as well.
Yeah, and when you look at the learning experience platforms that have come out, looking ahead, is learning experience platform even going to be the right term? Are we really moving more toward a performance mindset where learning kind of gets just kind of worked into what it takes to perform the job, and it's just one element, and sort of even the concept of L&D changes yet again a little bit more towards a full performance mindset? Is that something from what you see out in within companies is something that might be on the horizon?
It's interesting. We get hung up on labels. L&D is not unique in that we do get hung up on labels. I mean, the LXP, the learning experience design, these are buzzwords that are really popular in our industry right now. I hate buzzwords. I hate buzzwords because of the way I define a buzzword. I define buzzword as a term whose usage is spreading faster than its understanding. And I definitely think learning experience design and LXP kind of operate in that space. These are really, really powerful platforms and powerful shifts in our industry. But in the interest of making them digestible and making it work within a marketing copy, sometimes we dilute the true value of it to make it sound like it's this all-encompassing thing. I do think, to your question, I do think that organizations in general, they're not necessarily thinking of it as a learning conversation. They are looking at it through a standpoint of how can we use technology to make it easier for people to do their jobs. And in some contexts, that might seem like a learning situation. In others, it's just a matter of giving people the resources that we look for. I mean, we talk about things in our industry, like, I mean, we've been talking about it for years. I'll kind of go backwards in terms of the labels we've given it, but workflow learning and performance support and all of these different, even micro learning to a certain extent, things that we have labeled as L&D skills and L&D topics. No organization is using that jargon. They're just looking at it in a lot of organizations are increasingly going down this path of workflow learning, giving people what they need, where they need it, when they need it. And they're not thinking of it as an L&D thing. So I do think that the future of work is going to be playing more and more in that space. And we as L&D professionals, I think, one, need to be playing in that space more ourselves, but more importantly, to a certain extent, recognizing that that's the direction that a lot of organizations are going, and just answering the question of, well, what does that mean to the work that we do every day? Are we going to be the department that just delivers training solutions, which in your culture that might be good enough, that might be what you want, and that'd be fine? Or are we going to be more of that performance consultancy department within our organization, that people come to us with problems and we find different ways to solve them for them? And I do think that is the space that L&D, that we talk about, that maturity model of the more advanced the learning culture is, the more L&D professionals need to be playing in that secondary space of, we're here to solve your problem. We're here to help people do their jobs better. We're not here to deliver training. Training is one thing that we could do to solve that problem, but our job is to solve the problem, not to deliver training.
And that's very much in line with what we were talking about in terms of how technology can be used, right? It's not what features does it have, it's what problems does it solve, what goals does it help you achieve, and those are the, really the questions to ask, almost involving anything, but certainly in the L&D environment and when you're evaluating approaches and technology and everything else. Great. Well, any sort of last thoughts you have on how how technology might impact learning and development, and any changes? Maybe if you look ahead 5 or 10 years from now, are there some things maybe that come to mind that you'd like to see, or you think we might see a little bit less immediately down the line in terms of changes, technology-based changes to L&D and within corporations?
I would come back to the personalization piece. I do think that we are getting closer to a competency-based, and when I say closer, I mean near term, that there will be solutions out there that can deliver a competency-focused, personalized experience. And I think that is a truly transformative moment when we're able to do that, when we're able to recognize when technology is able to recognize what someone's competency is and respond with an appropriate layer of support. That is a layer of personalization through technology that I think has transformative impacts on the work that we do and the work that people do in general. The work that, like, what I mean by that is the work that L&D professionals do in supporting a workforce and the actual work that people are doing. It can be a transformative shift in terms of how we're able to build skills in our organization. The other thing that I would say, just as a overarching umbrella to all of this needs to be applied to the context of your organization. There are some things that we've discussed here today and we'll discuss in the keynote that people might hear and say, yeah, we're doing that. That's great. That sounds right in line with what we're doing. There might be other things that we're like, you're talking about this stuff that is happening now, and for our organization, that's science fiction. We're not even close to that. Or I might be saying, like, I'm talking about the learning personalization thing, and I'm saying it's 5-10 years out. And you might be in an organization that's got a huge IT infrastructure that's building something custom for your employees today, and it's delivering value. And what I'm saying doesn't seem like, well, are we too soon? And that none of that matters. I mean, you have to look at it and say, I'm sharing a broad stroke here. You have to apply it to the context of today. The one exception that I don't like absolutes of this is right for you, this is right for that. You have to apply it to your context. The one absolute that I will share is I do think that as we talk about the shifts that are happening in our industry and what it means to L&D professionals, whether or not you have a day-to-day tactical, whether or not what we talk about in this conversation and in the keynote has an impact on your day-to-day today in terms of the work that you're doing, doesn't necessarily mean that it is or is not something you should follow. You should be following all of these things, because the organization that you're working for today, chances are, is going to be different than the one you're working for tomorrow. And you want to make sure that you're building a skill set and building a an outlook on how you take your work as an L&D professional that makes you as valuable as possible to any possible employer, not just your first one, not just your current one. So I do think that there is an aspect of what we're talking about here that is following how the world is changing, how L&D is changing, and making sure that your skill set is always up to date with that.
Great. No, that's okay. And I think that's probably a great note to wrap up on. So lot to look forward to. I'm tremendously looking forward to your keynote. We'll talk more about learning, technology, the future, and all kinds of things. So David, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks again for taking the time to talk with me today, and looking forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thanks. Looking forward to you as well. Take care.
All right. You too.